Mm, mm, mm,
Mm.
mm, mm, mm. I mean, it's true. You know what? If somebody was like, you don't have to edit the videos, but it just means that anything you say on camera could and will likely be used against you on YouTube. All right, sure.
And we're going to clip it here just so that we have Autumn in the first part of the video saying that.
And perfect. Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jared,
And I'm Autumn.
and welcome to Coaches and Dragons.
Coaches and Dragons.
We're so excited for this week's build. Today, we're going to focus on modern monsters. And so,
Yeah.
Autumn, when we talk about modern monsters, what are we talking about?
We are talking about things like shame and doubt and comparison and fear.
Part of the reason we call them modern monsters is because, unlike in real life, you can actually slay monsters in D&D. But we'd like to think of the modern monsters as kind of, if we took the D&D and our perpetual crossover episode, what would those monsters translate to in real life? And so fear, doubt, shame, regret, those are all ways that these monsters become kind of modernized and we encounter them in our day-to-day lives. So much like you might roll into a combat encounter in D&D, oftentimes these are the monsters that we're facing in our day-to-day encounters. And so that's why we've called them modern monsters.
Yeah.
Which I think brings us to why we're going to focus on this week's build, which is what if we could build a character that helps us deal with the modern monsters we're facing in real life? Now, I think with this category in particular, it might be really helpful to have a DM who's kind of in on the journey with you, who's willing to give you those encounters, to face those quote unquote modern monsters. But I think also finding ways through the character's story, through the character's abilities, to put you in a position of perhaps facing your fears. Perhaps it's a narrative arc that's about really wrangling with regret. Perhaps there's interactions of shame with you and your party members as the story unfolds. So this might be a little bit of a conversation to have with your DM if this is something you want to pursue. But I think there's a lot of really great archetypes that we can play with if we're going to think about a character that is going to help us learn from our modern monsters.
Yeah. Before we jump into it, Jared, do you want to tell all the fine folks and myself, because maybe I don't remember, um, how do we do this character build?
Yeah, so for whenever we do one of these character builds, what we first want to focus on is our goals for the build. So what do we want this character to teach us, and what are our kind of ideal outcomes when we're done with the build? Then we're going to move on to inspiration, which is probably our favorite part, where we're going to brainstorm some
Definitely.
outside inspiration, pop culture references, things to bring into the character to kind of bring them to life and give us some ideas on how we might roleplay them. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with some design rules. And these are fundamentally constraints. We try to keep them really tight to help us create a really focused character. So they might be things that we are including as a must-have in the build. They might be things that we are saying absolutely not. That is a no-go boundary. And it's a way for us to keep a really clear, tight character concept to make sure that we meet the learning goals, make sure that we fulfill the inspiration. And from there, I'll write a backstory, I'll come up with a character description and bio, and I'll build out the character up to level 5. So if you want to bring this in game, you can do that and actually start to tackle some modern monsters of your own.
Ooh.
Let's start with character goals.
Mm.
Autumn, when you think about character goals for a character who's going to teach us about our modern monsters, what's kind of the initial goal that comes to mind?
I think that to be able to go and it's not so much that we're going and trying to learn and like discover these monsters for the first time. I think to really make sure that we're getting in there and learning about them, I almost want to play a character who's like, I'm an expert, I know about this.
Got it. Okay, so some sort of expertise in whatever the particular
Mm-hmm.
monster is that the character chooses to face.
Yeah, it's because I feel like it feels like less about discovering the monster and more
Mm-hmm.
about overcoming the monster.
Okay, cool. And I think there's something to build on, and we talk about this in one of our blog posts, is specifically around fear. And I think one of the ideas that we can build on here is that ability to move with the modern monster in life, right? Meaning like
Mm-hmm.
it is not an experience that maybe shuts them down, but I think maybe through their expertise, they are learning to kind of walk the walk with the monster, right? Maybe not
Yes.
befriend it, but like somehow like their life path, their journey, their day-to-day expertise, knowledge is like intertwined with the fact that this monster simply exists.
Mm-hmm.
Much like how like with fear, it's not necessarily the absence of fear is what the definition of courage, but the ability to walk with fear, to face fear, um,
Yeah.
is really this aspect of courage we want to highlight.
I love that one. I think it's super important. Um, I'll share a little story in that, I feel like I have depression and anxiety. And for the longest time, I was trying to figure, like, oh, how can I not have an anxiety attack again? How can I not have a depression cycle again?
Mm.
And it was always this quest to completely eliminate so that it would never exist anymore. And I remember my therapist helped me to understand, like, hey, this is part of who you are. This is part of living. And so when there was an acceptance of, like, hey, sometimes I might run into these things, it was more about like, okay, how do I make it so that they don't have as much impact on me when I do encounter them? And that was a lot more manageable. And it came with a lot less pressure and stress than when I wasn't trying to, like, oh no, it came up again. So it's like, I love so much what you're saying because it gives me that kind of vibe here of like, it's not so much that we're saying we want to make it so that you kill that monster and it never comes back again. It's like, look,
Yeah.
existing in the world, you're going to have some fear and some shame. What happens? What do you do?
Yeah. So, okay, so with those two goals in mind, so it sounds like expertise in whatever monster we're facing, and the character goal has to be willing to kind of walk with that monster, right? Recognize that it is a consistent present in their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mutable fact.
Yeah.
What I'm feeling is like maybe the last goal for this character, since like let's say that they're a really thinky type, right? They're an expert, they're somehow like kind of connected to this everyday existential threat. Maybe there's something that feels very real and tangible, making or crafting or something to kind of almost get out of their head in some ways, get out of the fear. Is that what you were thinking?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it is very much action focused. Like with the goal of this, it's kind of one, we really want you to understand who these monsters are. Two, we really want you to accept that these monsters exist. And then three, it's this, we want you to be able to take action. There's a lot of different ways that we can respond. And so maybe that's what this goal is three, is it would be amazing for a person playing this character to get to experience the variety of ways in which you can respond to maybe even the same monster.
This is maybe like a Swiss Army knife of actions to deal with the monster.
I love that. Absolutely. Yeah. And you can then rely on your strategy and what you've got to be able to make decisions. But I love that. It's all about this variety, because that is what's true about these modern monsters is look, there are plenty of people who would try to sell you a book and tell you that there's only one way to deal with shame. That's not. There are so many ways to deal with shame. And there's so many ways that one person can deal with shame and be with shame. So like, I really want for this character to help celebrate the variety of ways that we can respond to these modern monsters. Ugh. I'm excited. I got way more excited thinking about that variety one. Ooh, okay.
Autumn, are you ready to chat inspiration for this build?
Yes, I think I even teased to you the inspiration that I already had when we were building out the Guide to Modern Monsters.
Which is?
Van Helsing!
Tell me more about, like, what about Van Helsing?
Yeah, so when I think about Van Helsing, I think about somebody who is an expert, they're sought after, and they are kind of fearless in their approach on how they want to go about dealing with their chosen monster, in this case vampires, although there are some where he goes after other ones. But there's this expertise in that space, and I think when you have that expertise, he also has this, like, here are all these different ways that you might get it. Here's all these different signs that it might be present. So it's not just how do you kill the vampire, it's, is a vampire there? What are signs of it? Like, how does a vampire think and move? So like, he understands his target very well.
Yeah. There's like an investigative quality to how Van Helsing is operating to like pull from, right? So it's not enough to just know, here's everything I know about whatever monster I'm facing, but to then have this, again, it kind of actually goes back to that practice idea of real world experience, seeing the real world evidence, and these are the conditions that are occurring that, yep, monster, vampire, etc. is right around the corner.
Yeah. He's not somebody who's just studied them. He's experienced it. He's been with it. So I think Van Helsing really hits kind of maybe that part of the first two goals that we have, the expertise and the kind of, look, they exist and they're here.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I think we've done this a couple times with great success. If this was a mashup episode, Van Helsing plus blank equals our character build.
Mm-hmm. I want to know who you've got. I'm not naming all three inspirations here, Jared.
And like I immediately thought of like an Inspector Gadget scenario where it's like a Van Helsing plus Inspector Gadget. But I wonder if like there's another piece that's like a Swiss Army knife vibe that we could start to pull in that like feels like even like more like outside, like almost like not as lawful or not as like boop 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 boop.
Mm. Mm. You know who it made me think of is it Q, the guy from James Bond who's the quartermaster? But Q is the one. Q's the one who's like, oh yeah, that roll of toilet paper is actually when you pull 4 sheets off, it explodes.
Yeah, I think that you and I are picking up on the same vibe because I had this image. I was like, who would be like almost if you were to like hack the monster? Like they're the ones like in the back room being like setting up all of the systems. Like the Mission Impossible movies, like yes, they work with Tom Cruise, but like who's behind the scenes like setting all that up? So it's Van Helsing plus Q slash mastermind.
I want to add a third, and I feel like I want to add a third, and I feel like we need some non-aggressive like male energy. Oh, I think it's because we kept talking about Q. I'm going into like these spies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like these female spies. Um, hmm. I think the circus performer is what? What? That laugh! That laugh! Y'all, if this laugh is not in this YouTube video, I want revolt in the comments. Revolt in the comments.
So you said we keep going to all these like cool spies because of Van Helsing and Q. And I was like, wait, and you were like wanting more feminine energy. I was like, well, you could go femme fatale. And I was like, wait, what would be like the absurd thing to add instead of femme fatale? And it's like, okay, imagine Van Helsing plus Q, but it's Ugly Betty. Like it's Betty Suarez. So it's like super dorky, braces, terrible fashion, wants badly to be a journalist.
I mean, it's perfect. It's perfect. For those of you who have not seen Ugly Betty, that's okay. It is really good and campy. You should check it out. But yeah, Ugly Betty, like, I think she's so great for covering that goal number 2 as well, because there was always this, like, seeing the best in people, even people who were so awful. She kept giving people a chance and kept finding a way for them to be in there. Like, genius, Jared.
Yeah. Wanting to do the brave thing, has a strong sense of values and why they're doing what they're doing, but like still on that learning journey, wanting to express mastery. So Van Helsing plus Q, but if it was Ugly Betty.
Yes. Yes. I'm very intrigued by this journalist thing. I think that's a really interesting take, and I'm kind of hoping sticks with the character build, but you do you. But there's something really intriguing about oh my gosh, I love the Ugly Betty vibe. That just, perfect.
Cool. So now let's round things out with some of the character goals. So when you're thinking about the character goals, these should be things that help constrain the character, help give us a really tight focus. We've already got some goals, we've got some inspiration. What might be some of the things that we want to say yes to or things that we want to say no to?
I think going into goal number 3, where we want them to have a variety of ways to deal with monsters, I think it's going to be important for them to be able to have spell casting as well as weapons.
What about the spell casting specifically feels important?
I think it's about adding that variety to the toolkit.
Okay.
Because I think when I think about being able to use spells, we want variety, right? weapons always feel like it's the thing where you are going in to do harm. If they're a spellcaster too, things like calm person, hold person, there are a lot of different things that can happen that are not, that don't necessarily inflict damage.
The spells in their own way would be more about manipulating the situation or kind of shifting things around a bit.
Yeah. So when it comes to the spell casting, a question that I'm pondering right now is this: do we want them to have healing spells or no?
I guess what would you envision, like, given the character goals here, what does like
Mm-hmm.
healing spells offer?
Ugh. Okay, this is going into big coach territory. But like I could imagine it going either into one, healing yourself,
Mm-hmm.
some self-healing when encountering them. But two, I think there's so much that we learn from these modern monsters of fear and shame and doubt and regret, and sometimes there's just something to heal. Like I imagine this, I can't remember the cartoon, but there was this cartoon where there's this like big creature and he was hurting so bad and he was angry and everybody was so scared of him. And then what it turned out that he had a little thorn in his paw, and you took the
Mm-hmm.
thorn out. And you took the thorn out, he was okay. But he was really upset. Like a lot of things were going on because he was in pain. This creature was in
Mm-hmm.
pain. And so there's something, I think maybe that story is rolling around in my mind as this thing of like, sometimes some of these monsters, the way to stop them or combat them is to heal them.
So if I'm thinking about what you just shared, right, with the spells having access to healing, maybe a constraint is somewhere in their kit, somewhere in the build, they have to have a like healing capacity. It may not need to be a spell, it may not need to be like something to either recognize the
Mm-hmm.
hurt in others or like mend the hurt in others.
Mm. Oh, I keep going to like where I think this character is going to, it's very exciting. I feel really emotional right now thinking about this person.
It's interesting because I think, I want to do something that's a little bit different from other builds we've done in the past. We've done ones that are very aggressive and out there, ones that are um, pacifist. Rangalore in our Pleasure Bars video was intended to be a little bit more passive in some respects.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost wonder if this character really wants to be more focused on like control. So some
Mm-hmm.
way to control the battlefield, to capture, to net, to do something to like restrain, right? Going back to that kind of
Yeah.
Q mastermind piece.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones almost calling the shots, calling the stunts, but they aren't necessarily the ones trying to like go in for the kill, right? They are not the Buffy driving the stake in the heart of the
Mm-hmm.
monster in the end.
Yeah.
I think to summarize that last constraint would be a focus on like shifting the battlefield, like shifting the tides. I think from more so, I think in line with how we talk about modern monsters,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want this character to be someone who is so hell bent on eradicating the monster. Similar to the
Mm-hmm.
story you shared, right? This is not about extinguishing, right, a certain class of creatures. This isn't
Mm-hmm.
about expelling them. Perhaps the monster, going back to the thorn in the side, is actually something that one village might consider a monster, but this village
Mm-hmm.
or this person actually might see differently, right? They might have gotten to know the creatures a little bit more. They might understand that they have like a role to play in the
Mm-hmm.
environment, right? It might be the fact that it's a monster. It might be simply misunderstood, right? Or might be causing terror or incident, but it's actually really complex. And maybe some creatures express it more poorly than others.
Mm-hmm. Definitely feels like it turns up more of the intellectual. It reminds me of biologists. What happens if mosquitoes all leave? Like, I hate mosquitoes and I want them all gone. But there's this question that often comes up of like, what actually does happen? What's the impact on the systems if mosquitoes were gone
Yeah.
immediately? And it's understanding like, oh, they're actually a really important part of the food chain.
Yep.
And it's like, oh crap. So there's something really interesting about this character really wanting to understand?
Yeah. So to recap, for constraints, we
Mm-hmm.
want to have a variety of tools in the toolkit, including some spell casting. There should be some way to take care of the wounds, mental scars, physical scars, some sort of way to recognize maybe the hurt for others. They want to focus on controlling the battlefield. They might not be there to be a warrior, might not be there to go in for the kill, but they are there to end the conflict by different means than maybe how we've done it with previous characters. And finally, the last constraint, the monster, we're going to call it a monster in air quotes, that they're facing. So
Yeah.
we'll have to figure out some sort of narrative way or some sort of monster of choice that they have chosen to study, chosen to focus on, that might have some kind of mixed ambiguities, right? It might not be straight evil, might not be straight harmful, but might have a different connection to the other people, might have a different connection to this character. Focus on that character with a thorn in its paw that's just misunderstood, doing bad things for whatever other reason.
Yeah. I am very excited to see what you come up with, because I think there's this interesting test here of like, can you create a character that both hits these goals, but also is one that the party wants to be with?
Awesome. That feels like a great place to pause here. I'm going to go do the build, and we'll come back and see what we come up with.
I can't wait.
Hey everyone, this is the midpoint of the video where we encourage you to get out your dice and roll to see if you can beat Autumn on an insight check.
All right. 15.
If you beat Autumn on the insight check, you realize that she wants you to like and subscribe to Coaches and Dragons. You walk into a tavern. And as you walk into the tavern, you see a small empty stand off to the side, and it's got all matter of different goods. You see jars of cookies, you see sea glass jewelry, you see clothing that appears to be made out of like old sails and fishing equipment. And as you're starting to like take it all in, you see a sign hand painted above that says Elsie's Sea Salt Cookies and More. So good, you can't kelp yourself. And as you're like taking in the sign, you don't even notice this short, stocky woman approaching you, glasses beaming, and she comes up and runs up, and you see that she's in a poncho made out of old fishing nets, but the sea glass is embedded in the fishing nets in such a way that it almost feels like it's catching the sun's rays almost at the end of a fishing day. And her hair, it falls back along her head, and it almost like ripples like seaweed, and her excitement is just crusting like a wave as she looks up to make conversation with you. Hello, my name is Ellie, and I'm completing my doctoral thesis in redefining the biological and arcane classification of sea monsters within the realms of aquatic life, and I want to redefine them as benevolent creatures actually seeking a cooperative peace with land species. Are you willing to sign a petition for the protection and the banning of the practice of hunting these exotic sea creatures, otherwise known as sea monsters colloquially by the locals? If you're interested, I can offer you a report by Mode, an organization I represent, based on the observed behaviors and ecosystem of the local aquatic life. It even has pictures. And you finally make eye contact with the woman and see the longing in her blue eyes, enlarged by these thick spectacles resting on her nose. And you swear you saw a fish dart through her irises.
First of all, yes, I will sign your petition. Second of all, yes, I want to see all the pictures. Third, I'm assuming that I get a cookie and a bracelet.
You can 100% have a cookie, and we can actually offer you a discount if you're willing to sign a petition and make a donation to the protection of the sea wildlife.
We'll start with the cookie while I look at pictures.
You got it. Seaweed cookie coming right your way. So, Autumn, I want to introduce you to Elsie Kelpcutter. So, Elsie Kelpcutter was raised as a humble seaweed farmer with her family, and she grew up in this town that started out as a small little fishing village, and it's boomed into this bustling metropolis built around trade and culinary cuisine, and most importantly, a tourism around hunting the exotic sea monsters out in the ocean. You see, Elsie, having grown up as a seaweed farmer, she always stuck to the shallows. She was always afraid of going into the deep end. Until one day, she actually encountered the sea monsters. In a fishing expedition gone awry, she was thrown overboard, And she realized that the monsters that these people have been hunting in her city are actually the cute little water cows that nibble at the seaweed at her seaweed farm. Turns out when they get big, though, they become huge, they become large, shipwrecking serpents. And so Ellie, after being thrown overboard, finds herself underwater and curiously able to still breathe. And it's here that she learns the secrets of these serpents that are living underneath the waves. And she realizes that the sea monsters that she was once afraid of growing up aren't actually the real threat. For a bigger, darker, deeper predator lives in the oceans below. Elsie Kelpcutter is a warlock whose patron is of the Fathomless subclass. So these sea serpents, these sea monsters that she was so afraid of, actually start to become her benefactor. And they become her patron. And what's really cool about this class is it pulls in a lot of this aquatic imagery. It pulls a lot of this like connection to water and ocean. And Elsie just has this recurring fear of going too deep, going into the deep end, going and plumbing the depths, and not knowing what further monster is lying in the unknown. And so when we talked about monster hunters and bringing this all together, there are so many different directions to go in, but I thought we haven't really talked about kind of aquatic creatures or fear of the unknown in the same way as we've done on our blog. And I thought the sea monsters and this kind of culture around hunting them and what is actually the truth about sea monsters would really build this rich story for someone who has gone on to study the sea monsters, actually get a PhD in studying aquatic life and using her warlock abilities to learn more about them and be this bridge between this aquatic ecosystem that she's grown to love despite her fear, that still pushes her outside of her comfort zone, still pushes her through this curiosity into lands unknown, yet she wants to take care of it. She wants to protect it. And now, if there's an occasional nighttime operation to saboteur a fishing operation, so be it. Like, it's a day in the life of Elsie Kelpcutter.
So this ends up turning into a like Greenpeace campaign. Wow. So all right, her breathing underwater, is this a gill situation or is it like what's up with her being able to breathe underwater?
Well, so let's talk about the class. So part of the criteria that we had talked about was this idea that you'd wanted spell casting in the character. And so I feel like typically if we were to do a monster hunter character, right? Monster hunter, real world action, lots of tools. I think a lot of folks would instinctually go ranger, which they do have a fair amount of spell casting. But as I was like thinking about pulling this character together, I'm like, what's going to really give them that Betty Suarez energy? and that kind of cute energy, right? What's that kind of bookish piece? And that's when I really landed on Warlock for this class. And there's a couple reasons why. So Warlocks, first of all, when they pick their subclass, they pick it at first level. And she actually gets a feature from that class, the Fathomless subclass called Gift of the Sea. And it allows her to basically breathe and swim underwater. And so it would be a way for her to kind of push her own kind of comfort zone, right? Go into the deeper waters, go deeper and deeper and deeper while still having that kind of protection and safeguard. So that's a feature that's built into the class. Mechanically, one of the other reasons why I chose this class is you also get to sprout spectral tentacles as a bonus action when you're in combat. So she can actually bring like the spirit of the aquatic life to battle. And what's really interesting with these is they can actually slow down opponents. And so if you ever wanted to play a warlock that from a kind of battlefield perspective, like was able to kind of control things and slow them down and kind of like keep things at bay, and at later levels, these tentacles can actually like come in and defend you, so they can actually take a hit every now and then. So I thought it had this like interesting protective quality, this battlefield control quality that did a little bit more as in her, toolkit than say a ranger, which might be much more combat focused, much more focused on the hunting. And so how do you actually almost like borrow from the sea monsters that she's been afraid of, is learning from, and bring that to both kind of bring that to bear to be like, yeah, here's a giant tentacle about ready to smash you. You're afraid of sea monsters, right? And like kind of play on that fear while also educating people about like, hey, not totally here to smash. Like maybe she like summons a tentacle to like play in the fountains with the kiddos or something.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at how to build Elsie, right, as a warlock, one of the things that I started with was this Pact of the Tome feature. So warlocks typically get to choose from Pact of the Tome, Pact of the Blade, or Pact of the Chain. And Pact of the Blade felt like a non sequitur, right? Since we didn't want a super combat-oriented character. And I considered Pact of the Chain because you get to choose the form of the familiar that comes with the Pact of the Chain. And so she could have this like animal pal that's like helping her do the like aquatic evangelism, so to speak. But what I landed on was Pact of the Tome. And the reason for that being Betty Suarez, like this becomes the ideas book. Like I could imagine her like book of shadows that this Pact of the Tome gives her being like covered in ideas. But I thought it'd be a really cool way to merge this background of like researcher, marine biologist of, you know, the fantasy world with her warlock patronage. And what you do with Pact of the Tome is you can actually gain a couple cantrips for free, like by selecting that feature.
Okay.
So I opted here for Shape Water, Spare the Dying, and Thaumaturgy. Shape Water giving her more like access to this water magic. Spare the Dying giving us a little bit to that healing kit. And Thaumaturgy, again, to be the soundbox, to be the voice of all this aquatic folk. So almost the invocations that she's choosing, helping her build that relationship and like do her research better. So that way she can better kind of advocate and protect for the sea monsters in the aquatic life.
No, it's giving me big like Moana vibes too.
Yeah.
There's this like Moana, you know, protector of the islands and the water and this fearlessness and like moving the water around. That's kind of exciting with this too. I love that it's going in the water. I think the other piece that I really like about the tentacles is I love this idea. It really seems like it drives home that understanding and that walking with of like, I'm going to understand kind of the fear that comes in with a lot of this and use it. Like, I'm going to be okay enough that I'm going to be able to be with it and utilize it for my own benefit. To show off that. Like, there's something, like, that's really interesting, I think. Embracing that thing that was once very feared for her and still is a big fear for other people.
And I think one of the things I did want to keep in mind was, you know, you and I talked about not having a character that gets to like vanquish their fear, vanquish their anxiety, and like have that kind of built into how they operate. And I think you could definitely play Elsie in such a way that she's still afraid of the deep end, right? It's almost like by knowing like the depths of the ocean that she knows, like it's that kind of now fear of the unknown of like, oh my gosh, like there's so much more. Like the ocean is so deep. And she's like still only touching the surface of it. So I think there is still this, you know, different perspective, right? I bet she would still be afraid to go into the water and swim, and even if she had like the protection of her aquatic friends. But I think, again, putting it more on a journey, right? She might still be more comfortable, but it's never like an absence of the fear, right? There's still a lot of that kind of childhood fear of like, hey, we do not go into the deep end here, still popping up. But how does she get in relationship to that and using curiosity almost as her pathway to say, okay, well, what do I know? I actually know that this is a safe place to do. I know that actually that this creature won't hurt me. This creature will actually protect me. Ooh, I do not know about this creature. And so like super spooked, but what do I want to know about it, right? And what could she learn about it to, again, kind of keep going on this continuous learning journey as a way of walking with the fear.
Every time she encounters a new creature, a new situation, I almost want to have to roll a d20 to see, you know, how am I going to respond? Because sometimes the fear is going to win.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reality of for all of us, is sometimes that fear is going to be enough where it's going to stop us. And then we're going to get to learn from that moment and hope that when we get to face that fear again, we will keep going. And so I would want to make sure that there's some way for this character to get to experience that. And so whether that's they need to roll at disadvantage or they need to pass some kind of check or however that is, I think great opportunity in partnership with the DM to figure out what that mechanic would be.
When I was like building out Elsie, I kind of prioritize intelligence a little bit more than I might like typically for a warlock. But again, going back to this kind of bookish nature, if she fails an intelligence check, what is that going to do to her, right? And I think that would be a great way to role play the failure from a like stepping into a fear place, right? Versus a like, dang it, I'm just a dunce. It's like the like, oh crap, what do I not know, right? And it could be something that you role play that it spirals out from there, right? If they encounter something unknown, or they can't find information about it, or they try to find information about it, and it comes up inconclusive, oof, now what? right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
even if I have all these tools in my toolkit to learn more, to understand more, to do all the research, and like maybe it's not enough. Or, right, the other thing would be going in, I think, saying she's got all of this research. Now let's put it to real world practice. And when like theory does not meet application, like
Yeah.
then what? Right. And I think that could be interesting depending on the campaign that she's in. Maybe they're like she's encountering like different types of monsters, or maybe the monsters are corrupted in some way. Like it could be undead monstrosities, right? Like taking over an ecosystem, or it could be like a bigger threat that's you're like, ooh, didn't realize dragons could swim. Like that would be a great like encounter, right? Or else you'd be like, I don't think this belongs here. I don't think this like matches the studies of what I've done. So let's hit on like kind of the last few remaining features here, because I think in building this character, I really did want to honor some of the character builds and goals that we set out. So we talked about someone who's spellcasting, a little bit of healing. One of the fun things I thought, going back to this real world actions, I thought taking it to this kind of healer, activist, evangelist lens through like the Betty Suarez archetype was interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
because she's a human, I chose the variant human, got to pick up a free feat at level 1, and I actually went with the chef feat. And so with the chef feat, you actually get to make all kinds of like snacks and cookies. And so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
of course she's gonna do cookie fundraisers to like raise money for wildlife or raise money for her PhD. But also that would be a really great way to kind of support a group that she's traveling with, right? And
Oh
this idea
yeah.
of like seaweed cookies, or like she's there to like push back against anything that would like over farm, over fish, over whatever. So maybe she's like full on vegan cooking, seaweed and kelp and stuff being super sustainable. Like she's pushing this on everyone, like seaweed snacks for days. Um,
I
as a
love
way of
that
like supporting the
everything
party.
yes, I love that everything that she's making is like kelp based. Like here's kelp and cheese, y'all. Like it's like all of these things that we know, but it's kelp based. I think there's also something really interesting. As soon as you started talking about the cookies, I was wondering like if this is where the healer part was going to come in. And so there's something really interesting about the research aspect, and maybe even if I'm bringing in some of that Van Helsing piece where it's like, okay, maybe if they can't handle lacrosse or vampires can't handle garlic, like as she learns more and more things, like is she creating things where it's like, oh, we're going to go into the deep and we can distract this creature with this thing. And so she like constantly making cookies and treats that are that heal and harm and have all these like magical traits. I don't know, but
Yeah.
there's something interesting and kind of exciting about that for some
It's giving
reason.
very much SeaWorld trainer without the tanks and without the animal
Ugh.
rights injustices.
It's interesting thinking about her walking around with a whole bunch of cookies and stuff where she can tell like, oh, my energy's getting low, I need to eat this like cookie to get my energy back up, otherwise I'm in
Yeah.
trouble.
And that could be
Yeah.
even like that cue like moment for her to be like, all right, so here's what I've packed. I've got these like chili pepper seaweed flakes, which are great for boosting energy. I've also got these seaweed cookies that are a little bit sweet, also great for boosting energy. And then like whatever it might be categorically to
Yeah,
support the group.
for boosting energy.
Seaweed
Yeah.
snacks. You can't kelp yourself.
It's so good. Okay.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap up here with Elsie. A few other things I just wanted to highlight that I think are kind of great Easter eggs within the build. So, like I mentioned, the Eldritch Invocations, there's so many to choose from. The ones I happen to choose for Elsie that I thought were appropriate for this build, and again, building that relationship with the quote unquote monster. She has a invocation called Beast Speech that allows her to actually speak with animals at will. Feels appropriate. I
Mm-hmm.
also upgraded her tome, her ideas book, by taking the invocation Book of Ancient Secrets. And what's really neat about this is you actually get to now cast ritual spells as a warlock. And so I think doubling down on this, Van Helsing Q-ish, like I just need more tools. I just need to do them at ritual. That kind of being the path. But in ways to make them like suitable for this character, I picked up comprehend languages as the kind of free ritual you get with this feature, and purify food and drink. So like I could imagine her like making snacks for friends, also like making snacks for creatures. Like there could even be, maybe a backstory if you want to slip into, maybe like the waters are polluted. She's trying to like protect like an area of food, or like raise like certain
Mm-hmm.
snacks like for people who want to like otherwise harm the sea monsters. Um, and what this opens up to, which I think is interesting, is at later levels you can add more rituals to the book, right, by inscribing them, similar to how a wizard might function. And a couple great ritual spells that feel very on point for this character, which you wouldn't be able to take at level 5, but you could certainly take at later levels, would be water breathing and or water walk. And so this idea that she could almost bring people into the water with her, or like bring people across the water to like help them manage their same fears that she had, right? And this almost like, hey, been in your shoes, let's take a trip, like let's do a small excursion. And maybe she's like doing it in a like petting zoo style setting in the seaweed farm or something. But I thought just taking that path, there's so many like great spells that, again, if you were to take Elsie on this, you know, kind of supportive, like how do I become that bridge between like the monsters and the people that are hunting them, some of these spells here like would create some access to do that. And then just to double down on the thinkiness, I took Eldritch Mind, because she's got a few concentration spells in her back pocket, and you know she likes a good think.
What are those concentration spells?
So glad you asked about the spells. So here, I again trying to keep the character goals in mind. The spells I took were Eldritch Blast, Friends, again for the proselytizing on behalf of the aquatic creatures, Prestidigitation, Invisibility, Misty Step, Silence, Hypnotic Pattern, Sleet Storm, and Create or Destroy Water. And so what I liked about these spells is that they kind of double down on this ability to kind of like lock down an area. And even with something like Hypnotic Pattern, I could see her like actually like throwing up, you know, like when you look up at from the bottom of a pool or in an aquarium, like when you like look up and see like the glittering light and maybe fish swimming around, like that could almost be like the hypnotic pattern that pops up. Wow. And spells to kind of that feel appropriate for like if you're at a harbor, like Sleet Storm, like maybe has a way to like lock down a harbor as people are coming in and off a boat. Invisibility or Misty Step to like do some like stealth operations to maybe, you know, casually sabotage a capitalistic fishing operation. I don't know. These are only suggestions for what Elsie may do. None of it's been proven. And then like Create or Destroy Water, like maybe she's rescuing some of the sea monsters that have been captured and like needs to impromptu like create a tank or like create like a pool or something for them to swim in. And so I want to give her ways to interact with water, interact with the creatures, and become this kind of bridge evangelist, low-key warlock, doing her research on the aquatic life.
I also started to get a lot of things that like, ooh, like what a great place for a DM to play, right? It's this thing of like, ideally in this, like you're setting up something where there's a lot of stuff with water. What might they want to do with that?
I mean, there is potentially like a world where like if you really wanted to like remix it, I chose this patron like as this. I imagine like Elsie is like taking care of these creatures that are in like visit her seaweed farm, and maybe they're like very manatee like, they're like little water cows, but she only sees the babies. She doesn't realize that they grow up to like have like super long bodies like the dragon from Neverending Story. Like that's what I envisioned in my head, where it's like, oh my gosh, why would you hurt these soft creatures? And like they're like, because they can wreck our ships. And like, because you're hunting them. Like that kind of like narrative of like, well, why are we doing this? Why do we keep perpetuating this bad behavior? Well, it's systemic. It's like what we believe. And it's like, this is not good for us. And so
that's, you know what, it's such a good thing. Again, if we go back to the lesson of what are we trying to do with this character, we are looking to help a person play this character to be able to learn about modern monsters. In this case, a lot of it is fear, but like again, that fear, doubt, shame. I think fear and doubt will come in more, but shame might even, when she starts to think about like all of the different ways that she used to treat some of these animals. I think all of these pieces can be there. And if we think about like what do we want from this character, like for these people playing this character to do, like even just going into that kind of thing where you're having to say, well, of course they're attacking your ship because you've been hunting them. It's there's this way of saying like, hey, where are you hunting yourself right now? Like where are these pieces coming in? Where are your what are your sea monsters like going up against?
Well, and what have you kind of accepted as a truth that might not actually be the truth, right? Where have you internalized a whole set of behaviors, a lifestyle around something that's actually not true, right? That actually requires like firsthand real world observation about it. And I think that's where, when I was coming up with the backstory for Elsie, it was really interesting. And that's why I was so excited to share this with you, because it's not a monster hunter character, which I thought, like, when we first started setting up goals, I was like, and when you said Van Helsing, I was like, great, like, I got to figure out how this is going to work. But what I thought was interesting, and like little nuggets I've tried to like bake in as I'm thinking about who Elsie is and the environment she's in, like this tie-in of, you know, seaweed farmer, and supports like the local culinary scene, right? Which would benefit from fishing and fishing for exotic creatures, and like she's tied into the ecosystem. And so like even her food that she makes is a way of like saying like, hey, like there's other ways to eat, there's other things to prioritize, like what if we did this instead, what if we did this instead, and like constantly pushing for alternatives, recognizing like her growth maybe up to the point where you might meet her in adventure is like her kind of fighting up against like the man, right? Her fighting up against like all of this propaganda around sea monsters and the people who make money off of it, and like this kind of industry that's been built around like animal cruelty. And then they come back with more propaganda because those animals are simply just trying to like fight back. And little girls like her are now afraid to go into the deep end. Well, if they aren't afraid to go out to the ocean, then they never learn. And so it becomes this kind of larger narrative. But I thought, more so than characters we've done in the past, there's something about her relationship to even her people and to the city that she's a part of that, again, work with your DM on how this would work. But, you know, I think that would be really interesting to lay in to say, is there a way that she can just be from a coastal city, that she has this connection to maybe like fishing trade, and it could just be that her patron's just a really valuable species, right? And these are the experiences that I'm imagining she has by the time she hits level 5, which is what I've built this character around.
The level of fear that would exist in the community that she is a part of about like, well, what happened? Because they might agree with her, but it's still like, well, what will we do for food? What about my business? What will I do? There's so much of that fear of the unknown that we see with our clients. So many other people today, it's, what is AI going to do at my job? I can't stand the work that I'm doing, but I'm too scared. Like, what could I do next? How could my skills transfer? Will I ever be happy? Will I get like so much of this, like, if I make this one change, what's possible? And that fear can take hold so much. And so I'm imagining her it's not just this thing of like, how does she approach kind of changing the system, but it's almost like this really big monster of tackling their fear. Like their fear of what will happen. I like, with a lot of, there's like, you've done a character that I really wanted to play, you've done a character that I've really wanted to have in my party, and now I feel like you've created a character that kind of forces a specific type of campaign that I really want to play in. So I need a DM to pick this one up, run with it, and call me and say, hey girl, I need you to come play, because I need to play in this campaign. I'm gonna look right in camera for a second. DMs, you know we know you. You know we know who you are. I need you to do this for me.
Well, that's Elsie Kelp Cutter. Any final thoughts on Elsie, modern monsters, ways that folks could build a character to help deal with their modern monsters? What's on your brain?
Overall, I'm really excited, as always, with where it goes. It never goes where we expect it to, which is life anyway. I'm really excited about this idea of taking this person who has this kind of fearless, I'm going after it, I'm gonna learn it, and I know it's gonna be really hard, but we're gonna do this anyway kind of thing. But I love all of the different ways that she would have to tackle these modern monsters, especially the ones of fear and doubt. I mean, there's so many different ways to have to tackle it, just like we would in any campaign, and it's so smart. I'm really excited. I'm excited to see like these messages come through of people who are trying this out. I can't wait, and I can't wait to play it.
Oh, one other thing I did want to mention. So Elsie is a part of the Marine Observatory for Deep Water Exploration mode.
I knew when you were saying it, I was like, hold on, there's a joke here.
That's my final thought.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, that's, again, an Ugly Betty reference. You don't have to watch it. You should watch it. It's awesome and campy and fun, but it's okay if you don't. But yeah, it's an Ugly Betty reference. Oh, it's so good. This is so fun.
All right, everyone, that's it for this week's character build. We hope you're also ready and inspired to fight your own modern monsters. If you want more information about modern monsters and how we define them at Coaches and Dragons, you can check out more at our blog at www.coachesanddragons.com. And if you want access to this week's character build, you can check for the link in the description below. We've got the character sheet and we've got inspiration so you can actually build your own character like Elsie Cupcutter to fight your modern monsters. Remember, chaotic good vibes only.
Chaotic good vibes only. Woohoo! Bye.
Ciao.
Pass through. I was going into the taboo topics that you don't talk about with people, so we're not going to those.
Oh, you mean we aren't going to be talking about mental health, fear, doubt, regret, anxiety, all of the things that we don't talk about people?
No, those are fine. I was talking about politics, religion, money.
The Maga Naga. The Karen Kraken.
Oh, poor Karens. I have an Aunt Karen, and I have a good friend of mine. Her sister is Karen, so but they're not Karens. So love for the Karens who aren't Karens. I'm really sorry for what's happened.
Yeah. The only way to deal with a Karen Kraken is to make a deal with the High Priestess, also known as the Manager.
That's sad.